Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I sat on my couch, half asleep, when the knock came. It was abrupt and firm, cutting through the silence of my small home. I glanced at the clock on the wall, the glowing numbers reading 2:14 a.m. My stomach turned as I stood, my feet hesitant on the cold floor. When I opened the door, the porch was empty. A chill ran through me as I stepped outside, scanning the street for any sign of movement. The neighborhood was still, the streetlights casting long shadows against the pavement. Then I noticed the package on my doorstep. It was a plain brown box, about the size of a shoebox. There was no label, no return address, just my name scrawled in black ink. My breath hitched as I bent down, my fingers brushing against the rough cardboard. A strange sense of unease crept up my spine. I carried it inside, placing it on the kitchen table. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for a knife to cut through the tape. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Taking a deep breath, I sliced the box open and peeled back the flaps. Inside was an old wooden box, its surface scratched and worn. It smelled faintly of something earthy, like damp wood or aged paper. I ran my fingers along the carved edges, feeling the intricate designs. With cautious hands, I lifted the lid. A folded piece of parchment lay inside, along with a small silver key. The parchment crackled as I unfolded it, my heart pounding in my chest. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged letters scrawled in hurried strokes. The message was simple: Dio not lose the key. I stared at the words, my mind racing with questions. Who had left this here? Why me? I picked up the key, its cool metal sending a shiver through my palm. It was old, ornate, with a design that suggested it belonged to something important. I checked my phone, but there were no missed calls or messages. I wanted to believe this was some sort of mistake, but something told me it wasn't. The knock had been deliberate, and the package had been meant for me. I felt watched, though my windows revealed nothing but darkness outside. Sleep was impossible after that. I left the box on the table, but the key remained in my pocket. Each time I dozed off, I jolted awake, feeling as though someone was standing just beyond my vision. When the sun finally rose, I was relieved, though the unease never faded. The key occupied my thoughts throughout the day. It felt important, but to what? I searched my house for anything it might belong to, but found nothing. A deeper instinct told me that whatever it opened wasn't inside my home. That night, another knock came. This time it was softer, almost hesitant. My chest tightened as I approached the door, my hands clenching into fists. When I opened it, no one was there, only a slip of paper on the ground. I picked it up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The same jagged handwriting stared back at me, "Use the key." Before I teased too late, my mouth went dry as I read the words again. Too late for what? And where was I supposed to use it? My mind raced through possibilities, but nothing made sense. I decided to check outside, looking for any clue that might explain this. The street was eerily quiet, but as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed something new. A car was parked at the end of the street, its headlights off, but I could sense someone inside. I retreated inside, locking the door behind me. Every instinct screamed that I was being watched. I glanced at the key, turning it over in my fingers. It had to be connected to all of this, but I still had no idea how. Sleep eluded me once again. I kept the key close, feeling its weight as I lay in bed. The night stretched on, shadows moving strangely in the corners of my room. Every creak of the house made me tense, my ears straining for sounds that didn't belong. By morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. I needed answers. I traced my steps from the previous night, searching for anything I might have missed. Then, I noticed something on my porch that hadn't been there before. A door. An old weathered door, standing upright with no walls around it. My breath caught in my throat as I approached it. It shouldn't have been possible, yet there it was, real as anything. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. Locked. My pulse pounded as I pulled the key from my pocket. The metal slid into the lock with an unsettling ease. My breath hitched as I turned it, the mechanism clicking softly. The door creaked open, revealing only darkness beyond. I hesitated, fear warring with curiosity. Every part of me screamed not to step through, but I couldn't ignore the pull. I took a shaky breath and stepped forward. The air on the other side was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic. The door swung shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. My heart raced as I reached out, feeling rough stone beneath my fingertips. A tunnel stretched ahead, barely visible in the dim light filtering through unseen cracks. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. A whisper slithered through the air, my name spoken in a voice I didn't recognize. My breath came in shallow gasps as I turned, but there was no one there. The sound came again, closer this time. Panic gripped me, but I forced myself to move forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. The tunnel narrowed, pressing in around me. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, another door. My pulse thundered as I lifted the key, fitting it into a second lock. The door groaned open, revealing a small room with a single object in its center. A mirror, its surface cracked and warped. My reflection stared back, but something was wrong. The eyes in the glass weren't mine. A slow smile spread across my reflection's face, one I hadn't made. The figure raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. My body refused to move as the figure leaned forward, whispering words I couldn't hear. Then, with a sudden jolt, the mirror shattered. Story 2. The invitation arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting was elegant yet unfamiliar, my name written in neat cursive on the front. Inside, a simple card bore an invitation to a party at an address I didn't recognize. There was no host's name, no RSVP details, just a time and location. Curiosity got the best of me, and I searched for the address online. It was located in a quiet residential neighborhood a few miles away, not far from places I had been before. There were no business listings or event announcements tied to it, and the street view showed an ordinary-looking house. I debated whether to go, but something about the mystery intrigued me. As the evening arrived, I got dressed and headed out, my mind filled with questions. Who had sent the invitation? Why had they invited me specifically? The drive was uneventful, the roads empty except for the occasional passing car. When I finally turned onto the street, a strange unease settled in my stomach. The house stood at the end of the block, a two-story structure with dark windows and an unlit porch. There were no decorations, no signs of a party, and no other cars parked nearby. I double-checked the invitation, confirming I had the right place. The house was completely silent. I hesitated before stepping out of my car, scanning the area for any signs of life. The neighboring houses were quiet, their windows glowing faintly from within. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting long shadows along the pavement. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the short path to the front door. I knocked twice, the sound echoing in the stillness. I waited, but no one answered. I knocked again. this time louder, straining my ears for movement inside. The silence felt unnatural, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I glanced around, expecting someone to appear from the shadows, but the night remained undisturbed. I tried the door, pushing lightly against it, and to my surprise, it creaked open. A cold draft slipped out, sending a chill down my spine. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The interior was dark, except for the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the windows. The air smelled stale, like dust and something faintly metallic. I fumbled for a light switch but found nothing. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness, revealing an empty living room. Furniture sat covered in white sheets, untouched for what looked like years. The walls were bare, the silence overwhelming. There were no decorations, no music, no signs that a party had ever been planned. My heart pounded as I took another step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the empty space. No response. I checked the kitchen, the dining room, both just as lifeless. Dust coated the counters, and the air felt heavy with neglect. The house felt abandoned, yet the invitation had been sent just days ago. A staircase led to the second floor, its railing coated in a fine layer of dust. I hesitated at the bottom, every instinct telling me to turn back. But curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to go further. I placed a hand on the railing and slowly ascended, each step creaking beneath me. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched into the darkness. Several doors lined the walls, all slightly ajar. I approached the first one, pushing it open with trembling fingers. The bedroom beyond was empty except for an old wooden chair in the center. It faced the wall, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I stepped back, my breath shallow. I checked another room, finding nothing but dust-covered furniture. The entire house felt wrong, like a place frozen in time. I was about to turn back when I noticed something down the hall. The last door at the end of the hallway was closed. Unlike the others, it had no dust on the handle, no signs of neglect. My pulse quickened as I approached, my fingers tingling with unease. I reached for the knob, hesitated, then turned it slowly. The door swung open, revealing a small room with a single window. In the center stood a table, and on it, a single envelope. My name was written on the front in the same handwriting as the invitation. My mouth went dry as I stepped inside, the floor feeling colder beneath my feet. I picked up the envelope, my fingers trembling. Inside was a note, short and simple. "You shouldn't have come." The words sent ice through my veins. A floorboard creaked behind me, and I spun around. The hallway was empty, but the air had changed. The house no longer felt abandoned, it felt occupied. I backed out of the room, my breaths coming faster. The shadows seemed to shift, closing in around me. I rushed down the stairs, my footsteps echoing through the silence. The front door loomed ahead, and I reached for it, yanking it open with force. The night air hit me like a wave, but just as I stepped outside, something caught my eye. Across the street, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, was a figure. They were motionless, their face obscured by the shadows. My heart pounded as I stared, waiting for them to move, to speak, to do anything. But they only stood there, watching. A cold dread settled in my gut, and I forced myself to move, rushing to my car. I threw the door open and slid inside, locking it behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, the figure still unmoving in the distance. The engine roared to life, and I didn't hesitate. I sped down the street, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The figure remained beneath the street lamp, watching until I turned the corner and lost sight of them. My breath came in ragged gasps as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. When I got home, I locked every door, every window, double-checking each one. I sat on my couch, my hands still shaking, staring at the invitation that now felt like a warning. Sleep never came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure beneath the street lamp, waiting. Days passed, but the unease never left. I threw the invitation away, trying to convince myself it had been some elaborate prank. But every night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One evening, as I stepped outside to get the mail, my breath caught in my throat. There, sitting on my doorstep, was another envelope. The same handwriting. The same eerie silence in the air. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, turning it over. This time the message was different. We'll see you soon. Story 3. The road stretched endlessly ahead, dark and empty, except for the glow of my headlights. I had been driving for hours, the silence pressing in as the trees blurred past. It was the kind of road that made you feel alone in the world, cut off from everything. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional chirp of insects in the night. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw a pair of headlights appear in the distance. At first, I thought nothing of it, but they were approaching fast. Within seconds, the vehicle was right behind me, its high beams glaring into my mirror. A cold chill crept down my spine as I tightened my grip on the wheel. The car was too close, practically tailgating me on the empty road. I tapped my brakes lightly, hoping they would back off, but they didn't. Instead, they edged even closer, the headlights filling my mirrors. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the road ahead, searching for a place to pull over. A small turnout appeared on the right, and I signaled, easing onto the gravel shoulder. The moment I slowed down, the car behind me swerved into the other lane. Without hesitating, it sped past, its engine roaring as it disappeared into the night. I exhaled sharply, my hands trembling on the wheel. Something felt off. I hadn't seen the driver's face, not even a silhouette in a windshield. The car's windows had been impossibly dark, like black glass reflecting nothing. I pulled back onto the road, shaking the unease from my mind. Maybe it was just some reckless driver, someone in a hurry to get somewhere. But as I continued, the road ahead remained empty. No taillights in the distance, no sign of the car that had just sped past. Minutes passed, then an hour. There were no turns, no exits, just a straight road through miles of thick forest. I should have seen the car ahead of me by now. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. My pulse quickened as a new thought took hold. What if I had imagined it? The exhaustion of driving alone for so long could play tricks on the mind. I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter. No, I had seen it. The headlights, the way it loomed too close behind me, it had been real. I turned on the radio, needing some kind of noise to break the silence. Static greeted me, followed by faint whispers before cutting out entirely. My stomach twisted as I checked my phone. No signal. The isolation of the road suddenly felt suffocating. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in my mirror. My breath hitched as I recognized them immediately. The same car, the same blinding high beams. It was back. My foot pressed harder on the gas, my speed climbing as fear crawled up my spine. The car behind me matched my pace, staying right on my bumper. My knuckles turned white as I struggled to keep control, the road curving slightly as I pushed faster. I tried to ignore the way my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I needed to think. If I pulled over again, would it pass? Would it disappear like last time? The thought of stopping made my skin crawl. The road opened up to a stretch of straight highway, and I took the chance to slow down just slightly. The car remained behind me, unmoving. Then, without warning, it swerved sharply into the opposite lane. I held my breath as it pulled up beside me, keeping perfect pace. My hands trembled as I turned my head, desperate to see the driver. But all I saw was darkness. The windows were pitch black, no outline of a person inside. It was like staring into a void. I pressed harder on the gas, my car surging forward, but the other vehicle kept up effortlessly. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it veered off the road. My eyes widened as it sped straight into the dense trees without slowing down. I slammed on my brakes, my tires screeching as I skidded to a stop. My chest rose and fell in rapid breaths as I stared at the spot where the car had vanished. There was no crash, no sound, nothing. It was as if the car had never been there. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to move. I couldn't sit there all night. My hands shook as I put the car in drive, my headlights cutting through the darkness. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to check my mirrors again. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away. The bright fluorescent lights were a welcome relief as I parked and stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me. I walked inside, my hands still trembling as I ordered a cup of coffee. The cashier, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, gave me a curious look. "You all right?" he asked, noting my pale face. I hesitated before nodding. "Just a long drive," I muttered. He glanced outside at my car, then back at me. "You come down Route 46. I froze. "Yeah, why?" The man sighed, shaking his head. "A lot of strange things happen on that road," he said. "People talk about a black car that follows them. Always too close. No driver." My blood ran cold. "What happens to them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Some make it here," he said, his gaze darkening. "Some don't." A shiver crawled up my spine. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I wasn't taking that road ever again. Story 4. The first time I heard the scratching, I dismissed it as tree branches against the glass. The wind had been strong that night, and I assumed it was just the bare limbs of the old oak outside my window. I fell asleep easily, forgetting about the sound by morning. But the next night it happened again. It was soft at first, a light tapping against the window pane, like something small was brushing against it. But as the night went on, it grew more deliberate, more rhythmic. I turned on my bedside lamp and pulled back the curtain, expecting to see the branches swaying in the wind. There was nothing outside but darkness. I stared for a while, waiting to see if something moved, but the yard was still. No wind, no branches close enough to touch the window. A chill ran down my spine as I let the curtain fall back into place. The scratching stopped. The next day I examined the outside of my window in the daylight. The glass was clean. No marks, no signs of anything brushing against it. The tree was at least 5 feet away, its branches too far to reach. There were no animal tracks in the dirt beneath the window either. That night, I stayed up, waiting. I kept my light on and my eyes fixed on the window, determined to catch whatever was causing the sound. Hours passed, and just as I was beginning to drift off, it started again. A slow, deliberate scratching, like nails dragging across the glass. I sat up quickly, my breath caught in my throat. This time I didn't rush to pull back the curtain. I waited, listening to the sound as it continued. The scratching wasn't random, it came in short bursts, stopping for a few seconds before starting again, like something was waiting for a response. My heart pounded as I finally pulled the curtain aside. There was nothing there, just my own reflection staring back at me. But as I leaned closer, I thought I saw movement. A faint shadow just beyond the glass, disappearing the moment I blinked. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I imagined something watching me through the window. By morning, I felt drained, but I forced myself to go outside again, looking for any new signs. The ground was undisturbed. No footprints, no scratches on the glass. It was as if nothing had happened. I considered setting up a camera, but part of me didn't want to know what I might see. The idea of watching the footage and discovering something standing outside my window, unseen in the moment, made my skin crawl. Instead, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, a trick of my tired mind. That night, I locked my window, double-checking that it was secure. I shut the curtains tightly and turned on my bedside lamp. I even played music softly, hoping to drown out any noise. For a while, it seemed to work. But just as I was starting to relax, the scratching began again. This time it was louder, more insistent. My stomach twisted as I gripped the blanket, willing myself to ignore it. The sound didn't stop. It grew more frantic, like something was desperate to get in. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I wanted to call someone, but what would I say? That something invisible was scratching at my window. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. Instead, I sat frozen, waiting for the sound to stop. After what felt like hours, silence finally filled the room. I let out a shaky breath and closed my eyes, exhausted. But just as I was drifting off, something changed. The air in my room felt heavier, colder. I turned onto my side, facing away from the window. And then, I heard it. A faint creak of the floorboards behind me. My breath caught in my throat as my entire body stiffened. I hadn't moved. I hadn't gotten up. The sound had come from inside the room. Slowly, I turned my head, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. The room looked the same, nothing out of place. But the air felt wrong. I forced myself to sit up, my hands clutching the blanket. I scanned the room, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But then I noticed something. The curtains were open. I knew I had shut them. I was certain of it. My stomach twisted as I looked at the window. The lock was still in place, but the glass, it wasn't clean anymore. Faint streaks ran down the surface, as if something had been pressed against it. Something with fingers. Nah. I didn't sleep at all after that. When the sun finally rose, I packed a bag and left, not caring that I had nowhere to go. I drove to a friend's house, making up an excuse about needing a break from home. They let me stay without question, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. I stayed there for a week. The scratching didn't follow me. No strange sounds, no open curtains. It was almost enough to convince me that I had imagined the whole thing. But when I finally returned home, everything felt off. The house smelled stale, like it had been left empty for months instead of days. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I hesitated before stepping inside, my skin prickling with unease. I checked every window, every lock. Everything was secure. But when I reached my bedroom, my stomach dropped. The curtains were open again, and this time there were words on the glass. Written in the faint streaks left behind by whatever had been outside, there was a single message. A message that made my blood run cold. I found a way in. Story 5. I woke up groggy, rubbing my eyes as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet touched the cold floor, and I instinctively reached for my slippers. But they weren't there. I frowned, glancing around the room, expecting to see them kicked to the side. They were gone. Annoyed, I stood up and searched the room. My sneakers, which I had left by the door the night before, were missing too. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, even behind my desk, but they had completely disappeared. My apartment was small, and there weren't many places they could have gone. A creeping unease settled over me. I lived alone, and I always locked my doors before bed. No one else had a key, and I hadn't heard anything strange during the night. I tried to shake off the feeling and decided I must have misplaced them, though it made no sense. I put on an old pair of sandals and went about my morning. Hours later, I was heading out to run errands when I opened my front door and froze. My missing shoes were neatly placed just outside, side by side. The laces of my sneakers were tied in perfect bows, and my slippers were aligned as if someone had carefully positioned them. My stomach twisted at the sight. I looked up and down the hallway, expecting to see someone lingering, watching, but it was empty. The building was quiet, the only sound a faint hum from the air vents. I bent down, hesitating before touching the shoes. They looked the same, but something felt off. I picked them up and turned them over in my hands. There was no dirt on the soles, no sign that they had been taken outside. It was as if they had simply vanished from my room and reappeared here. My heart pounded as I stepped back inside and locked the door. I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had somehow carried them out the night before and forgotten, but that didn't explain how they were placed so neatly. I considered calling the building manager, but what would I even say? Someone had stolen my shoes and returned them without a trace. It sounded ridiculous. That night, I double-checked my locks and wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I told myself it was a one-time thing, just some weird coincidence. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I barely slept, my ears straining for any sound out of the ordinary. In the morning, everything seemed normal. My shoes were still where I had left them, and nothing else was missing. I started to convince myself that I had overreacted, that there was some logical explanation I had overlooked. But just as I was beginning to feel at ease, something else happened. That evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I glanced at my bedroom doorway and froze. My sneakers were there again, neatly placed by the door. I had left them in the closet, I was sure of it. My throat tightened as I slowly stepped toward them. The laces were tied differently this time, loose, almost carelessly, like someone had handled them and then changed their mind. I turned around, scanning my apartment with growing dread. Every door and window was locked, just as I had left them. I checked under the bed, behind the shower curtain, even inside my tiny pantry. There was no sign of anyone. My skin crawled as I backed into the corner of my room, gripping my phone tightly. I slept with the lights on, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak and whisper of the building sent shivers down my spine. I woke up several times, heart pounding, convinced I had heard footsteps. By morning I was exhausted but determined to figure out what was happening. I set up my old laptop with its webcam aimed at the door. If someone was coming into my apartment, I wanted proof. That night I placed my shoes inside my closet, making sure they were tucked away in the corner. I hit record and tried to sleep, though my nerves were on edge. When I woke up, the shoes were gone again. My stomach dropped as I grabbed my laptop and checked the footage. My hands trembled as I clicked play, my eyes locked on the dimly lit screen. For hours, nothing happened. Then at exactly 3:17 a.m., the closet door creaked open by itself. I stared, unable to breathe. The shoes slid out slowly, as if pulled by invisible hands. They stopped near the doorway, aligning themselves neatly before going still. The closet door gently swung shut again, without a sound. There was no person, no shadow, nothing that could have done it. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse racing. I felt sick, my skin cold with fear. Something was in my apartment, something I couldn't see, and it was playing with me. I packed a bag and left, staying at a friend's place for the night. I didn't tell them everything, only that I was feeling uneasy in my apartment. They laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken my shoes wasn't finished with me. When I returned the next day, my apartment was exactly as I had left it. The shoes were still by the door, untouched. I hesitated before stepping inside, the silence pressing down on me. I needed answers. I searched online, looking for similar stories, and found accounts of objects moving on their own, strange disturbances, unexplained disappearances. None of it comforted me. Some suggested a ghost, others something worse. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. That night, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and spoke aloud. "Who are you? What do you want?" My voice wavered, but I forced myself to stand firm. The apartment was silent, the air heavy around me. I waited, breath held, but there was no response. Just as I was about to give up, a sound came from the closet, a slow, deliberate creak. My blood ran cold as I stepped back, watching as the door shifted open just an inch. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even stay. I grabbed my keys and left, not caring how late it was. I spent the night in my car, too afraid to go back. The next day, I called my landlord and broke my lease. I never returned to that apartment. I hired movers to pack my things while I stayed far away. I never told them what had happened, only that I needed everything out as soon as possible. Even now, I think about it sometimes. About the shoes, the way they moved, the way they were always placed so perfectly. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else entirely, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it wanted me to notice, and it did. Story 6. I woke up groggy, rubbing my eyes as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet touched the cold floor, and I instinctively reached for my slippers, but they weren't there. I frowned, glancing around the room, expecting to see them kicked to the side. They were gone. Annoyed, I stood up and searched the room. My sneakers, which I had left by the door the night before, were missing too. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, even behind my desk, but they had completely disappeared. My apartment was small, and there weren't many places they could have gone. A creeping unease settled over me. I lived alone, and I always locked my doors before bed. No one else had a key, and I hadn't heard anything strange during the night. I tried to shake off the feeling and decided I must have misplaced them, though it made no sense. I put on an old pair of sandals and went about my morning. Hours later, I was heading out to run errands when I opened my front door and froze. My missing shoes were neatly placed just outside, side by side. The laces of my sneakers were tied in perfect bows, and my slippers were aligned as if someone had carefully positioned them. My stomach twisted at the sight. I looked up and down the hallway, expecting to see someone lingering, watching, but it was empty. The building was quiet, the only sound a faint hum from the air vents. I bent down, hesitating before touching the shoes. They looked the same, but something felt off. I picked them up and turned them over in my hands. There was no dirt on the soles, no sign that they had been taken outside. It was as if they had simply vanished from my room and reappeared here. My heart pounded as I stepped back inside and locked the door. I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had somehow carried them out the night before and forgotten, but that didn't explain how they were placed so neatly. I considered calling the building manager, but what would I even say? Someone had stolen my shoes and returned them without a trace. It sounded ridiculous. That night, I double-checked my locks and wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I told myself it was a one-time thing, just some weird coincidence. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I barely slept, my ears straining for any sound out of the ordinary. In the morning, everything seemed normal. My shoes were still where I had left them, and nothing else was missing. I started to convince myself that I had overreacted, that there was some logical explanation I had overlooked. But just as I was beginning to feel at ease, something else happened. That evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I glanced at my bedroom doorway and froze. My sneakers were there again, neatly placed by the door. I had left them in the closet, I was sure of it. My throat tightened as I slowly stepped toward them. The laces were tied differently, this time loose, almost carelessly, like someone had handled them and then changed their mind. I turned around, scanning my apartment with growing dread. Every door and window was locked, just as I had left them. I checked under the bed, behind the shower curtain, even inside my tiny pantry. There was no sign of anyone. My skin crawled as I backed into the corner of my room, gripping my phone tightly. I slept with the lights on, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak and whisper of the building sent shivers down my spine. I woke up several times, heart pounding, convinced I had heard footsteps. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to figure out what was happening. I set up my old laptop with its webcam aimed at the door. If someone was coming into my apartment, I wanted proof. That night, I placed my shoes inside my closet, making sure they were tucked away in the corner. I hit record and tried to sleep, though my nerves were on edge. When I woke up, the shoes were gone again. My stomach dropped as I grabbed my laptop and checked the footage. My hands trembled as I clicked play, my eyes locked on the dimly lit screen. For hours, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the closet door creaked open by itself. I stared, unable to breathe. The shoes slid out slowly, as if pulled by invisible hands. They stopped near the doorway, aligning themselves neatly before going still. The closet door gently swung shut again, without a sound. There was no person, no shadow, nothing that could have done it. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse racing. I felt sick, my skin cold with fear. Something was in my apartment, something I couldn't see, and it was playing with me. I packed a bag and left, staying at a friend's place for the night. I didn't tell them everything, only that I was feeling uneasy in my apartment. They laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken my shoes wasn't finished with me. When I returned the next day, my apartment was exactly as I had left it. The shoes were still by the door, untouched. I hesitated before stepping inside, the silence pressing down on me. I needed answers. I searched online, looking for similar stories, and found accounts of objects moving on their own, strange disturbances, unexplained disappearances. None of it comforted me. Some suggested a ghost, others something worse. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. That night, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and spoke aloud. "Who are you? What do you want?" My voice wavered, but I forced myself to stand firm. The apartment was silent, the air heavy around me. I waited, breath held, but there was no response. Just as I was about to give up, a sound came from the closet, a slow, deliberate creak. My blood ran cold as I stepped back, watching as the door shifted open just an inch. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even stay. I grabbed my keys and left, not caring how late it was. I spent the night in my car, too afraid to go back. The next day I called my landlord and broke my lease. I never returned to that apartment. I hired movers to pack my things while I stayed far away. I never told them what had happened, only that I needed everything out as soon as possible. Even now, I think about it sometimes. About the shoes, the way they moved, the way they were always placed so perfectly. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else entirely. But I know one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it wanted me to notice, and it did. Story 7. I found the letter on my doorstep early one morning. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, no postage stamp, nothing to indicate where it had come from. My name was written on the front in neat, deliberate handwriting, as if the sender had taken their time. Inside was a single slip of paper with only one sentence: "I've been watching you for a long time." My stomach tightened as I read the words over and over. There was something deeply unsettling about the simplicity of the message, the lack of any explanation or context. I looked around my quiet neighborhood, scanning the empty street. The morning air was crisp, and the world still felt asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, unseen. I hurried inside and locked the door, my hands clammy against the doorknob. I told myself it was a prank, some kind of joke, but deep down I knew better. There was an eeriness to it, an intentionality that made my skin crawl. I placed the letter on my kitchen table and stared at it, my mind racing through every possible explanation. The rest of the day passed in a haze, my nerves stretched thin. I kept glancing at the windows, checking the locks, expecting something more to happen. But nothing did, and by nightfall, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the house felt magnified. Every shadow seemed to shift when I looked away. I lay in bed, my mind replaying every moment of the day, wondering if I had missed something, some sign of who had left that message. Morning brought no relief. The letter was still on the table, a silent reminder of the unknown presence in my life. I debated throwing it away, but something held me back, some instinct that told me this wasn't over. A week passed without incident, though my unease never faded. I avoided being alone outside for long, always feeling the weight of unseen eyes on me. I told no one about the letter, unwilling to hear them dismiss it as paranoia. Then, another letter arrived, placed carefully on my doorstep just as before. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my breath coming in short gasps. This time there was no message inside, only a blank sheet of paper, pristine and untouched. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to make sense of it. Was it a warning? A taunt? I had no way of knowing, and that uncertainty was worse than anything. I locked every door and window, double-checking them twice before nightfall. Sleep eluded me again, and this time I was certain I wasn't alone. I heard soft noises outside, the faint rustling of leaves, the distant sound of footsteps that never came close enough to see. I stayed in bed, heart hammering, gripping my phone in my sweaty palm. Morning light brought temporary relief, but the dread lingered. I left my house only for necessities, my head on a constant swivel. My life was shrinking, consumed by fear of something unseen yet undeniably real. Another week passed, and I began to feel foolish. Maybe it really was just a prank, some bored stranger amusing themselves at my expense. I tried to move on, to shake the paranoia that had wrapped itself around me. Then, the third letter arrived. This one was different. It was not left on my doorstep, but slipped under my front door while I slept. The idea that someone had been close enough to do that made my stomach churn. I hesitated before opening it, dread settling in my chest like a heavy stone. Inside was another blank page, but this one was smeared with dirt, as if it had been dragged along the ground before being placed in the envelope. My hands trembled as I held it. Something was changing, escalating. Whoever was doing this was getting bolder. The thought made me feel sick, a deep, twisting fear that settled in my bones and refused to leave. I stayed awake all night, sitting in my living room with the lights off, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, silence stretching around me like a suffocating fog. Just as my exhaustion was about to take over, I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock at the front door. 3 sharp raps that sent my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't move, didn't breathe, every muscle in my body locked in place. The knock came again, softer this time, almost gentle. Then silence. I waited, straining to hear any movement outside, but there was nothing. Minutes passed, then an hour, before I finally found the courage to move. I crept to the window and peered through the curtain, expecting to see a figure standing there. But the porch was empty, the street as silent as ever. My fingers tightened around my phone, the urge to call someone overwhelming. I didn't sleep that night, and by morning I made a decision. I packed a bag, grabbed my car keys, and left. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to be somewhere else, anywhere but there. As I drove away, I glanced at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone watching me. The street was empty, but I knew better. They were still there, whoever they were, waiting. I checked into a motel miles away, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, to relax, to believe I was safe. But when I woke the next morning, there was a letter waiting outside my door. No name, no address, just the same familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I picked it up, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I opened it with trembling fingers, my vision swimming as I read the single sentence inside. You can't run from me. Story 8. I was driving down a quiet stretch of highway, the road empty except for the occasional headlights in the distance. The night was cold, and a thick fog rolled over the asphalt, making the air feel damp and heavy. I had the heater on low, but even with the warmth filling the car, a chill crept over me. As I reached for the radio to break the silence, something cold touched my shoulder. The sensation was light, almost like fingertips barely grazing my skin. My breath hitched, and I quickly turned my head, expecting to see someone behind me, but the back seat was empty. A shiver ran through my spine as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning the dimly lit space behind me. Though nothing was there, the feeling of a presence lingered, settling heavily in the pit of my stomach. I exhaled sharply, trying to shake the unease pressing against my chest. Maybe I was just tired, imagining things after hours on the road. I rolled my shoulders, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. But the sensation of unseen eyes watching me refused to fade. Minutes passed, and I tried to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The highway stretched on, empty and endless, with no signs of towns or exits nearby. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the faint whistle of wind slipping through a crack in the window. Then, in the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something shifting in the darkness. It was quick, like a shadow flickering just beyond my vision. My breath hitched as I forced myself to keep driving, unwilling to look back again. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles turning white against the wheel. The logical part of my mind told me there was nothing there, that I was alone in the car. But the heavy weight in the air, the unmistakable feeling of being watched, said otherwise. A sudden pressure settled against the back of my seat, as if someone was leaning forward. My heart pounded, and my foot hovered over the brake, torn between pulling over and speeding up. The thought of stopping on this desolate road, alone in the dark, made my stomach twist with dread. I inhaled slowly, trying to steady my nerves. "It's nothing," I whispered under my breath, my voice barely more than a breathless tremor. But as soon as I spoke, the air in the car grew colder, the temperature dropping so suddenly that my breath fogged the windshield. A whisper brushed against my ear, so faint I almost didn't catch it. My pulse hammered as I turned my head slightly, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror once more. This time the darkness wasn't empty. A shape sat in the back seat, its outline barely distinguishable in the dim light. My throat tightened, my fingers trembling against the wheel as I tried to force my mind to make sense of it. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, but I could feel it staring at me. The highway stretched on, and I gritted my teeth, refusing to acknowledge the thing sitting behind me. My hands ached from how hard I was gripping the wheel, my knuckles aching with the tension. The weight of unseen eyes bore into me, every fiber of my being screaming that I was not alone. A whisper came again, softer this time, like a breath against my skin. My pulse slammed against my ribs, and I felt a pressure against my shoulder, as if something unseen had placed a hand there. My foot pressed harder against the gas pedal, the speedometer climbing as I fought the overwhelming urge to scream. The fog thickened, swirling around the car like ghostly tendrils. The road ahead was barely visible, but I didn't dare slow down. Every instinct told me to get as far away from this place as possible, to put distance between me and whatever had found its way into my car. My mouth was dry, my breathing shallow as I fought to keep control of myself. I tried to think rationally, to come up with a reason for what was happening, but nothing made sense. The air felt suffocating, thick with something unseen yet undeniably present. I forced my eyes forward, refusing to look in the mirror again. The highway stretched on endlessly, no exits, no signs, just mile after mile of darkness and fog. The weight in the backseat didn't shift, didn't move, but its presence pressed against me like an unbearable force. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the presence lifted. The air lightened, the chill receding as warmth returned to the car. My breath came in ragged gasps, my entire body trembling as if I had been holding my breath for far too long. I dared to glance in the rearview mirror, my stomach twisting with apprehension. The back seat was empty, the darkness undisturbed. My pulse was still erratic, but the suffocating feeling of being watched had disappeared. My grip on the wheel loosened slightly, my fingers aching from how tightly I had been holding on. The road ahead remained shrouded in fog, but it no longer felt as ominous, no longer carried the weight of something unseen lurking just beyond my sight. I let out a shaky breath, rolling my shoulders in an attempt to shake the lingering unease. Maybe it had been exhaustion playing tricks on my mind, or maybe something had truly been there. Either way, I wasn't about to stop driving. The highway stretched on, silent and empty, the only sound the steady hum of my engine. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back again. Whatever had been there was gone now, but a deep, unsettling feeling told me it had never really left. Story 9. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark room. I rolled over, squinting against the glow, expecting some late-night spam message. When I saw the name on the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It was from Daniel, my childhood friend who had died 5 years ago. I sat up abruptly, heart pounding as I stared at the message. It was short, just 2 words, "I'm still here." My hands trembled as I hovered over the screen, unsure if I should respond. A cold chill crawled down my spine as my mind raced for an explanation. Maybe it was a cruel prank, someone using his old number. But Daniel's phone had been deactivated after his death. I remembered his parents saying they shut it off. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity gnawed at me. I typed out a response with shaky fingers. "Who is this?" I stared at the screen, waiting, my pulse loud in my ears. The 3 dots appeared, indicating the sender was typing. I clenched my phone tighter, my stomach twisting in knots. The reply came quickly. "It's me." My breath hitched as I read the words. It didn't make sense. Daniel was gone, buried in the cemetery on the outskirts of town. Yet here I was, staring at a message from him, my body stiff with fear. I hesitated before responding again. "This isn't funny. Daniel is dead." My thumb hovered over the send button before pressing it. The message delivered instantly, and I waited, every muscle in my body tense. Moments later, another reply came through. "I know, but I never left." My chest tightened as a wave of unease washed over me. The room suddenly felt colder, the shadows stretching unnaturally in the dim light. I glanced around, feeling watched. I tried to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. My hands were clammy as I typed again. "What do you mean?" The dots appeared and disappeared several times before the next message arrived. "Come see me." A lump formed in my throat. I wanted to stop responding, to turn off my phone and pretend none of this was happening. But something inside me urged me forward, a deep, gnawing curiosity that refused to let go. "Where?" I typed, regretting it the second I hit send. The response was immediate. "Our place." My stomach dropped as memories flooded back. Daniel and I used to explore the old abandoned house at the edge of town when we were kids. It was our secret spot, a place we swore we'd always return to. I stared at the message, dread curling in my chest. I hadn't been there since Daniel's death. He'd been found near that house, drowned in the river behind it. The police called it an accident, but I had never believed it. Something about his death had never felt right. I told myself not to go, that it was a bad idea. But an hour later, I found myself driving through the empty streets, the glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, pressing against me like a weight. When I pulled up to the abandoned house, the night was eerily still. The trees stood motionless, not a single leaf rustling in the wind. My headlights illuminated the crumbling structure, the wooden boards warped with time. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. My phone vibrated in my lap and I jumped. Another message, "Come inside." My hands felt numb as I reached for the door handle, stepping out into the night. The air was thick, carrying the faint scent of damp wood and earth. I approached the house slowly, my footsteps crunching against the gravel path. The front door stood slightly ajar, just as we had always left it. My breath came in shallow gasps as I reached out, pushing it open with a creak. The darkness inside swallowed me whole as I stepped in. The air was cold, unnaturally so, making my skin prickle. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper. Then I heard it, a faint whisper. My name. It sent an icy chill down my spine, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I turned sharply, the light trembling in my grip. "Daniel." My voice barely came out, cracking under the weight of fear. Silence stretched before another whisper followed. "I'm still here." The voice was familiar, but distorted, like it was coming from underwater. My throat tightened as I backed away, my instincts screaming at me to run. Then I saw it. A shadow in the corner of the room, darker than the rest. It moved, shifting unnaturally, as if struggling to maintain its shape. My breath hitched as I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The shadow stretched toward me, and a wave of cold air swept through the room. My body locked in place, frozen with terror. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The room fell silent once more, the only sound my ragged breathing. My phone buzzed again. With trembling hands I lifted it, my heart hammering in my chest. The message was simple: you shouldn't have come. My stomach twisted violently as I turned and bolted out of the house, my legs shaky beneath me. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, locking the doors with fumbling fingers. My hands were ice cold, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The house loomed in my rearview mirror, dark and still. I sped away, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I wanted to believe it was a sick joke, that someone had hacked his old number. But deep down I knew the truth. I had seen something that wasn't supposed to be there. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with what had happened. When morning came, I tried calling Daniel's old number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I listened to the automated message, my heart pounding. The number was no longer in service. Story 10. The book sat in the center of my couch as if someone had carefully placed it there. I hesitated before picking it up, running my fingers over the smooth, unmarked cover. There was no title, no author's name, just a plain black surface. It felt old, the edges of the pages slightly yellowed, though there was no dust on it. I turned it over, checking the back, but it was just as blank. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the pages, expecting them to be empty as well. Instead, they were filled with dense, handwritten text in ink that had faded over time. The handwriting was small and precise, though I couldn't recognize the language. A shiver ran through me as I sat down, flipping back to the first page. The words were strange, unfamiliar, yet something about them felt unsettlingly familiar. I traced my finger along the text, hoping some meaning would reveal itself. As I did, a faint whisper echoed in the room, so soft I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. I snapped the book shut and looked around, my heart hammering in my chest. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I set the book down and stood, checking the doors and windows, but everything was locked. No one had been here, at least not that I could tell. Returning to the couch, I eyed the book warily. It hadn't been there before I was sure of it. I had left for work that morning, and the couch had been empty. No one else had a key to my house, and there was no sign of forced entry. So how had it gotten here? I picked it up again, turning to a random page. This time the words seemed to shift, blurring slightly as I tried to focus. A headache formed behind my eyes, a dull pressure that made my vision swim. I blinked and shook my head, snapping the book shut once more. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I decided to set the book on the coffee table and ignore it for the night. If it was still there in the morning, I would figure out what to do with it then. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind filled with images of the strange text, the whisper that had slithered through my ears. At some point, exhaustion won, dragging me into uneasy dreams. In them I was standing in a darkened library, the shelves stretching endlessly in every direction. A single book lay open on a wooden table, its pages flipping on their own. Shadows moved along the walls, watching me. A voice, low and distorted, murmured words I couldn't understand. My hands reached for the book, and the moment my fingers touched the pages, I jolted awake. My breath was ragged, my skin damp with sweat. I sat up, my eyes adjusting to the dim light of my bedroom. For a moment I told myself it had just been a dream. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The book was on my nightstand. I hadn't brought it upstairs. I had left it on the coffee table. My throat tightened as I reached out, hesitantly touching the cover. It was cool beneath my fingertips, as if it had been sitting somewhere much colder before appearing here. I stood abruptly, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I needed to get rid of it. Without hesitation, I grabbed the book and walked downstairs, my movements stiff with unease. I went straight to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped outside into the night air. The street was quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. I walked to the trash bin near the curb, lifted the lid, and tossed the book inside. The moment it landed with a dull thud, relief washed over me. I shut the bin firmly, locking the lid in place. Back inside, I double-checked the locks before heading upstairs. I climbed into bed, exhaling slowly. It was gone. That was all that mattered. I forced my eyes shut, willing myself back to sleep. Morning came and sunlight streamed through my window. I stretched, the tension from the night before easing slightly. With a deep breath, I got out of bed and made my way downstairs. But the moment I stepped into the living room, my body went cold. The book was back on the couch. I froze, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I had thrown it away. I had seen it land in the trash bin with my own eyes. Yet here it was, sitting in the exact same spot as before. A chill ran through me as I approached it, my hands trembling. I picked it up, my breath unsteady. This time, when I flipped through the pages, the words were different, clearer. I could read them now. My name was written over and over again, scrawled in frantic, uneven handwriting. I dropped the book, stumbling back. My vision blurred with fear, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I needed to get out of here. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, leaving the book where it lay. I drove for hours, not caring where I went, as long as it was far away. When I finally stopped, I was in a small roadside diner, my hands still shaking as I gripped a cup of coffee. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but nothing made sense. After a while, I convinced myself to go back. Maybe I had been hallucinating from exhaustion. Maybe I had imagined the entire thing. But as soon as I stepped into my house, all hope of normalcy vanished. The book was open on the floor, its pages flipping on their own. The air was thick, oppressive, pressing against my chest. A whisper slithered through the room, growing louder, more insistent. My vision darkened at the edges, the walls seeming to close in. I turned and ran, my body acting on instinct. I didn't stop until I was outside again, gasping for breath. I knew then that the book wasn't just something I had found. It had found me. And no matter what I did, it wasn't going to let me go. Story 11. I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up, "Check your front door." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. I hadn't installed any apps that would send a message like that, and I lived alone. Slowly, I placed my phone down and turned toward the door. The apartment was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I hesitated before walking to the peephole, unsure if I even wanted to look. A deep unease settled in my stomach as I pressed my eye against the glass. The hallway outside was empty, just the dim glow of the overhead light flickering faintly. I backed away, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. Maybe it was just some sort of glitch, a mistake from a spam app I didn't remember downloading. Still, my heart pounded, and I had the overwhelming urge to check the locks. My fingers trembled as I twisted the deadbolt to make sure it was secure. A soft vibration from my phone made me jump. Another notification had arrived, the same message as before, "Check your front door." My skin prickled, and I turned the phone over, unwilling to look at it any longer. Someone had to be messing with me, but how did they know where I lived? I decided to ignore it and sat down, trying to focus on the show playing on my television. The laugh track felt unnatural, forced, and the longer I listened, the more it grated on my nerves. Every few minutes, my eyes flickered back to the phone, half expecting another message. The unease refused to fade, coiling around me like a suffocating presence. Minutes passed, then an hour, and nothing else happened. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was nothing outside. But when I finally stood to go to bed, something made me pause. My phone screen lit up again, and this time the message had changed. Open the door. A chill ran down my spine as I backed away from the device. I wasn't going to open that door. My body tensed as I listened for any sign of movement outside, but the hallway remained silent. I grabbed my phone and turned it off, shoving it under a pillow as if that could erase the growing sense of dread. Lying in bed, I tried to convince myself I was safe. My door was locked, my windows were shut, and I lived on the 3rd floor. But the idea of someone standing just outside, waiting for me to follow the message, gnawed at my thoughts. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but every creak in the building made me flinch. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I woke up suddenly. My apartment was pitch black, the only sound a faint ticking of my bedside clock. Disoriented, I reached for my phone, forgetting that I had turned it off. The screen stayed dark, but as my fingers brushed the surface, I realized something else. My bedroom door was open. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. I always closed my bedroom door before sleeping, a habit I never broke. My heart pounded as I stared into the darkness beyond, the hallway barely visible. I strained to hear anything, any sign of movement, but the silence was absolute. My hands shook as I reached for the lamp, fumbling for the switch. Light flooded the room, casting harsh shadows against the walls, but nothing was there. The hallway stretched empty before me, the apartment unchanged except for that door. I knew, without a doubt, that I hadn't left it open. Forcing myself to move, I slipped out of bed and approached the doorway, every nerve screaming at me to run. I checked the apartment, flipping on every light, searching for someone. But there was no sign of a break-in, no unlocked windows, nothing missing. It was as if the door had opened by itself. A shudder ran through me as I locked the bedroom door again.